And Senator Marco Rubio, who was trying to rebound from a shaky debate performance last week in New Hampshire. Senator Rubio, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Last night, you said that President Obama basically doesn't have the right to appoint Scalia's successor. Take a look.
I do not believe the president should appoint someone, and it's not unprecedented. In fact, it's been over 80 years since a lame duck president has appointed a Supreme Court justice.
Now, Senator, when you say lame duck, President Obama's basically been a lame duck since he was reelected in 2012. Are you saying that no president can appoint someone to the Supreme Court in their second term?
Well, I'm not saying it's illegal. He most certainly has the power to nominate someone. The Senate's already said it. Mitch McConnell last night was very clear. We are not moving forward on the Supreme Court nominee until after this election. And one of the reasons why is this president is no longer, he's now at the end. If this was early in his second term, that's one thing. But he now has less than a year left in office. The Supreme Court can function with 8 justices. They're not in year round, so they can get through this term of the Supreme Court with all of its decisions. They've done this before. And then there'll be an election in November, and we're going to have a debate about what kind of justice should replace Scalia, and the voters are going to get to vote for a new president. And I think this will be part of their calculus. So I think we should wait till after November before we move forward on confirming any justice to the Supreme Court. The president can nominate whoever he wants, but the Senate's not going to act, and that's pretty clear. So we can keep debating it, but we're not moving forward on it, period.
But Ronald Reagan named Anthony Kennedy to the Supreme Court in November of his 7th year. And Kennedy was actually confirmed in Reagan's 8th year. So are you saying somehow that November is okay, but 3 months later is over the line?
Yeah, again, I mean, it doesn't really matter what they've done. Reagan did back in '87. It was in '87 when he nominated him. And so obviously it was still earlier in the year. If this was November, October, or September of last year where the president had more than a year left in office, then perhaps this would be a different discussion. But he now has basically about 11 months, 10 and a half months left in office. We have an election coming up. There'll be a debate over what the Supreme Court justices should be like. And voters are going to weigh in November, and they're going to elect a new president. So I think the president should allow the next president to appoint the justice to the Supreme Court. And if it's me, and I anticipate that it will be, I'm going to look for someone in the mold of Justice Scalia who, while irreplaceable, I think is a model jurist and one of the great jurists in American history.
Last night, you also got into quite a battle again with Senator Ted Cruz over immigration. Here's some of that.
You know, the lines are very, very clear. Marco right now supports citizenship for 12 million people here illegally. I oppose citizenship.
Look, this is a disturbing pattern now, because for a number of weeks now, Ted Cruz has just been telling lies. Right. He lied about Ben Carson in Iowa. He lies about Planned Parenthood. He lies about marriage. He's lying about all sorts of things, and now he makes things up.
Senator, what do you think of Ted Cruz?
I like Ted, but in this campaign in the last few weeks, he has kind of developed this disturbing pattern of telling things that simply aren't true. Just this week alone, he had an ad pulled off the air because it lied about sanctuary cities and immigration. He has also, by the way, lied about my position on marriage, my position on Planned Parenthood. We all saw what he did to Ben Carson. He keeps acting like it was just a whisper campaign. These were paid robocalls that were being made out to his activists in Iowa, telling them to inform people at the caucus sites that Ben Carson had dropped out. Donald Trump made an allegation last night. I don't know if it's true or not about those sorts of robocalls happening here now. And then he portrays himself as some sort of immigration purist. Though he's always been strict on immigration. That's just not true. When it comes to the issue of people that are in this country illegally, he argued passionately in favor of doing something for them, like legalizing them and bringing them out of the shadows. And so either he wasn't telling the truth then or he's not telling the truth now. But to portray himself as he consistently does, that he is the only conservative in this race, I mean, it's just not true. And I think that's being exposed here as this campaign moves forward.
Senator, I also want to ask you about your closing statement last night, which has attracted some attention. You said, under President Rubio, we are going to be a country that says that marriage is between one man and one woman. Now, as you well know, the Supreme Court has ruled the other way on that. Are you calling for a constitutional amendment?
No, you're going to have a president that says that marriage is between one man and one woman. Ultimately, the decision to define marriage and to regulate it especially has always belonged to the states. It doesn't belong at the federal level. I think the Constitution already says that. The Constitution is pretty clear. If it doesn't define a power to the federal government, It doesn't belong to the federal government.
But wait a minute.
That's why the decision by the Supreme Court on this issue is wrong.
But are you going to try to overturn the Supreme Court's decision? I mean, that is the law of the land.
A president can't overturn a president cannot overturn a Supreme Court decision. I can tell you that I believe we need more justices like Scalia, and any justice, irrespective of their personal view on the issue of the definition of marriage, who is someone who's going to apply the Constitution as originally meant by the society that wrote those words at the time, would tell you that the issue of marriage, regulating it and defining it, has never belonged to the federal government. That court decision of Obergefell should be overturned on the basis of the Constitution. If you want to change the definition of marriage, go to your state legislature and have the debate there. I believe it should be between one man and one woman. I'll engage in that debate. But ultimately, your elected representatives at the state level will decide it. It doesn't belong at the federal courts, and that decision should be overturned. But again, a president can't overturn a Supreme Court decision.
Senator, as you know all too well, one of the big stories going into last night was your, I think you'd agree, shaky performance in the debate in New Hampshire. Do you think that last night you undid the damage from that debate? Should people who suddenly began to worry, is this the guy we want to put up in the general election against the Democratic nominee, have you eased those concerns?
Yeah, Chris, if you followed it, as you have now, and you've been part of 2 of them, we've had 9 debates, and in 8.75% of these debates, I've done very well, according to everyone who watches them. I had 1 bad answer to questions, obviously, because the voters of New Hampshire opined that way, and I took responsibility. It happens. But I'm very proud of my debate performances consistently throughout this process, and again last night. And here's the key. If I'm the nominee, I look forward to debating Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. And one of the points I'm making is I should be the nominee, because not only am I as conservative as anyone running, I am the conservative that wins. I consistently beat Hillary Clinton in poll after poll. And I think last night, with the passing of Justice Scalia, we are reminded of how important this election truly is, how high the stakes are, and why we must win. I am the conservative that unites the Republican Party, that grows it, that wins this election, and that begins the important work of undoing the damage Barack Obama has done to us.
Senator, you and your former mentor, Jeb Bush, are in a battle, at least right now in the polls, for 3rd place in South Carolina for who's going to be the leading establishment candidate coming out of South Carolina. You say that he has no foreign policy experience, but he's been firing back recently. Take a look.
Marco can say that he has a record, but what would it be? That he goes to committee hearings and talks to people? That's fine. That's the job of a senator. But what is the record of accomplishment?
Senator, what about that argument? He ran a big state 8 years, and you attend hearings.
Well, first of all, that's not the extent of my experience. First of all, he has no foreign policy experience. As he's gone on to say, his foreign policy experience consists of the fact that he lived overseas for a period of time when he was young, and that he invests overseas and led trade missions. That's not foreign policy experience. Foreign policy experience is doing as I did, leading the effort to impose additional sanctions on Hezbollah. Foreign policy experience is doing as I did when I helped lead the effort to impose sanctions on human rights violators in Venezuela. Foreign policy experience is the Girls Count Act, which now leverages U.S. foreign aid to prevent human trafficking and slavery around the world. Foreign policy experience is doing as I did when ISIS first popped up, warning quickly. While the president was saying this was a JV team and no one else was paying attention, I was consistently warning about ISIS, about what was going to happen in Libya, about the situation now in Syria, about the fact that Vladimir Putin would conduct airstrikes in the Middle East 2 weeks before he actually started doing those things. That's foreign policy experience on which I have achievements. Jeb has no foreign policy experience, period. And that is the most important job of the president. I'm ready to be the commander-in-chief and the head of our foreign policy on my first day in office.
Senator, we have about a minute left. During the last week's debate, you supported extending the draft, signing up for the draft. 2 women and said that you have no problem with anyone serving in combat as long as they can meet the standards. But this week, you seem to flip on that, saying that you don't support women signing up for the draft or making them serve in combat. Why the change, sir?
It isn't a change. Selective service is not the draft. Selective service is basically a list of people's names. Second, just because someone's drafted, which I don't believe anyone ever will in the future, that's not the nature of modern warfare, but just because someone's drafted doesn't mean you're drafted into combat. My point is, and again, this was another thing Ted Cruz was putting out there that wasn't true. He was saying that I was in favor of forcing women into combat, drafting them and forcing them. I am the father of 2 girls that are much closer to combat age than anybody else out there in terms of that this is being debated about. My oldest daughter is 16 years old, okay? And I am not in favor of her being drafted and forced into combat. I'm actually in favor of a volunteer armed forces.
I'm
not even sure we need selective service anymore.
Just to clear this up, do you believe that she should, and any woman should have to sign up for selective service?
I'm open to selective service being opened up to women that want to be a part of it. What I've never said, and I don't support, is that we are going to draft women and force them into combat roles. That's absurd. No, I've never supported that. I've also said that if a woman wants to serve in a combat role and can meet the minimum requirements just like a man, and, you know, that would be open to that. I would be open to them doing that. By the way, those minimum requirements for combat service apply to both genders. So it's not just women that have to meet it, the men would have to meet it as well, and there are many men that don't meet those combat standards. That's all I've said. But the idea that we were going to draft women and force them into combat, I never said that. That's not my position. And all I said is selective service is just a registry of names for a draft that's never going to happen. So I don't even know why we still have selective service.
Senator Rubio, thank you. Thanks for making time for us. And, of course, we'll follow how this week goes for you and all the other candidates in South Carolina. Thanks, sir.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, Chris.